I stood in the long, crowded line at the university graduation office, my heart thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. My cap was pinned perfectly, and my gown felt heavy and official. 4 years of late-night studying, cheap coffee, and endless exams had finally come down to this one moment. I was just seconds away from holding my diploma, the physical proof that I had made it. When I finally reached the front, I gave the clerk my biggest smile. I told her my name was Jordan and that I was here to pick up my degree. She didn't smile back. Instead, she typed slowly into her computer, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the screen. She clicked her tongue and then looked up at me with a cold, blank expression. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice sounding like a machine. "We cannot release your diploma today. Our records show that you have an outstanding balance of $4,000 in unpaid library and administrative fees." My smile vanished instantly. I felt a cold wave of panic wash over me. I had paid every single bill on time. I stood there, stunned, as the students behind me started to grumble. I whispered to myself, if only I'd checked their records earlier, maybe I would have seen this coming. As I walked away from the office, my mind raced back to my freshman year. I had always trusted this university. To me, it was a place of higher learning and a trusted authority that promised to help students like me. I remember the glossy brochures they sent, promising generous financial aid and scholarships that would cover almost everything. I had believed in their mission and their promises. But now, that trust felt like a fragile glass vase that had just been shattered on a concrete floor. I tried to go back to the office later that afternoon to talk to a supervisor, but the staff had become strangely evasive. One person told me the fees were for lab equipment, while another said they were for processing. They were giving me conflicting information and wouldn't look me in the eye. It was as if they were reading from different scripts, and none of them made any sense. The air in the hallway felt heavy and stifling. My heart sank as I checked my online student portal and saw that my fees had somehow increased by another $500 overnight with no explanation. It felt like a trap was closing in around me. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat on my floor with a flashlight and a stack of every financial aid paper I had received over the last 4 years. I began to review the paperwork line by line, comparing the numbers on the documents with the charges on my online account. My eyes blurred from the tiny font, but then I saw it. There were several unexplained deductions from my Pell Grant that I had never noticed before. Large sums of money that were supposed to go toward my tuition had simply vanished. I also noticed that 3 of my minor scholarships were missing entirely from my final senior year statement. When I called my friend, Leo, he just shrugged his shoulders over the phone. "Maybe it's just some weird bureaucracy," he said, trying to sound helpful. "You know how slow the school is with paperwork." I wanted to believe he was right, but my gut told me something else was happening. Then I received a cold, automated email from the registrar's office. It warned that the university would withhold my official transcripts permanently if the fees weren't paid immediately. My future career was being held hostage by numbers that didn't add up. I knew I couldn't just sit and wait for them to fix a mistake they weren't admitting to. The next morning, I went back to the administration building and formally requested my full, unredacted financial records. I expected them to hand over a folder, but instead, I was met with more walls. The administrators kept delaying their responses, claiming that the internal computer system was currently updating and that my files were temporarily inaccessible. 1 week turned into 2, and every time I visited the office, they had a new excuse. I started to feel like I was being watched by the campus security guards who stood near the entrance. I grew more suspicious with every passing day, wondering why it was so difficult for them to show me my own payment history. Finally, a thin envelope arrived at my apartment. It only contained a few pages of partial records, and the numbers still didn't add up to the total they said I owed. It was as if they had cherry-picked the data to keep the truth hidden. They weren't just being slow, they were actively hiding the evidence of where my money had gone. I decided to see if I was the only one facing this nightmare. I spent the next several days quietly talking to other seniors in the library and the dining hall. I asked if anyone else was having trouble getting their degrees released. To my horror, I discovered that I wasn't alone. As I compared my records with those of other students, a terrifying pattern began to emerge. Dozens of us have been hit with the exact same unpaid fees at the very last minute. Many of the students were international or first-generation college students who didn't know how to fight back. We found systematic overcharges and instances where aid money was diverted into general administrative accounts without our permission. It was a massive, organized scheme of aid misappropriation. I tried to organize a small meeting to discuss what we found, but many students were too afraid to speak out publicly. They were worried that the university would retaliate and ruin their chances of getting into graduate school. The fear on campus was palpable, and it made me realize how powerful the university's grip truly was. I felt like I was standing against a giant, but I knew I couldn't stop now. Armed with the evidence from other students, I marched into the bursar's office for a final confrontation. I demanded to see the head administrator, a man named Mr. Vance, and showed him the patterns I'd found. I pointed out the duplicate charges and the missing scholarships. Mr. Vance didn't even look at the papers I put on his desk. Instead, he leaned back in his leather chair and gave me a smug, dismissive look. He insisted that every charge was correct and that I was simply confused by the complexity of university billing. When I didn't back down, his voice became low and threatening. He told me that if I didn't stop my harassment of the staff, the university would suspend me immediately, which would mean I would lose my credits entirely. I felt a surge of anger, but I didn't let him see me flinch. As I walked out his office, I pulled my phone out of my pocket and hit the stop button on my recording app. I had started documenting every single interaction in secret, and I had just captured his threat on tape. If they wanted to play dirty, I was ready to play even dirtier. That evening, I posted a vague message on a local community board asking for advice on university financial aid. A few hours later, I received a private message from a man who introduced himself as Mr. Holloway. He told me he was a retired university financial officer who had worked at my school for 20 years before leaving abruptly. We met at a quiet park away from the campus. Mr. Holloway's hands shook slightly as he looked through the partial records I had managed to get. He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and anger. He hinted at a deep, internal network of fraud that had been growing for years. He told me that some administrators were using a slush fund to cover up budget shortfalls by stealing small amounts from thousands of student accounts. Mr. Holloway looked me directly in the eyes and gave me a chilling warning. "Be careful, Jordan," he whispered. "The higher-ups will stop at nothing to protect themselves. They have a lot to lose." Having an ally with his experience made me feel less alone, but his words also made me realize that I was dealing with a criminal organization, not just a school. A few days after my meeting with Mr. Holloway, the university suddenly changed its tone. I received a call from an administrator who sounded very kind and helpful. She told me that the university had decided to reassure me that they were looking into my case and that the problem would be fixed. They even promised to make some fee adjustments to my account. For a brief moment, I felt a rush of false hope. I thought that maybe my recording and my questions had finally scared them into doing the right thing. I checked my student portal the next day, expecting to see a zero balance. However, my heart sank when I saw that they had only removed $50 from the $4,000 debt. It was a pathetic gesture designed to make me go away while keeping the core issues hidden. They were trying to buy my silence with a tiny discount while they continued to hide the thousands of dollars they had stolen from my Pell Grant. It was clear that they weren't cooperating at all. They were just trying to stall me until graduation weekend was over and I had no leverage left. Since the university wasn't giving me the real records, I decided to look closer at the documents I already had. I spent hours using a magnifying glass to look at the approval signatures on my old aid forms. That's when I noticed something very strange. The signatures for the Office of Financial Oversight looked identical on every single form, even though they were supposedly signed by 3 different people over 3 years. I realized that some administrators had been forging documents and signatures to approve the transfer of my aid money into their private accounts. I used my laptop to overlay the signatures, and they matched perfectly, a clear sign of a digital stamp or a forgery. As I searched through the student records Leo had shared with me, I saw the exact same forged pattern appearing in multiple departments across the university. The fraud wasn't just in the bursar's office. It was widespread and involved people from several different levels of the administration. This was the smoking gun I needed. It was no longer just a billing error. It was a paper trail of a felony. My hands trembled with excitement and fear as I realized I finally had the proof to bring them down. As I continued my investigation, the atmosphere on campus began to shift. Other students noticed me talking to Mr. Holloway and spending all my time in the library archives. Some of my classmates started to act nervous around me. A few of them even warned me to stop. "Don't get involved, Jordan," a girl from my history class said as we passed in the hall. "You'll just get in trouble and lose your degree for real." It felt like the administration was spreading rumors to isolate me. I felt a growing sense of paranoia, wondering who was actually a friend and who was reporting back to Mr. Vance. Then, one night, I received a mysterious anonymous email from a burner account. It didn't have a name, but it contained a list of several hidden accounts that didn't appear on any of the university's public financial reports. The email said these were the accounts where the administrative fees were actually being sent. It was another piece of the puzzle, and it came from someone inside the system who was too afraid to show their face. The walls were closing in, but the truth was starting to leak through the cracks. With the list of hidden accounts, I went into overdrive. I spent every waking hour collecting every email, receipt, and internal memo I could find that mentioned those specific account numbers. I stayed up until 3 in the morning, organizing the evidence into a digital folder that I backed up in 3 different places. I found memos where administrators discussed optimizing aid distribution, which was really just code for how to steal from students without getting caught. I even found an old email from a junior clerk who had questioned the charges and was told to stay in their lane. The scale of the misappropriation of aid funds was staggering. It wasn't just thousands of dollars. It was likely millions over the last decade. But as I gathered more evidence, I started to notice strange things happening. My school email account was suddenly locked for security reasons, and I noticed a campus police car parked outside my apartment building more often than usual. It was clear that the administrators were monitoring my activity and were getting ready to strike back. I knew I had to move fast before they could stop me. Just as I was starting to feel overwhelmed by the university's surveillance, I received another tip. This time, it wasn't just an anonymous email. It was a full, detailed spreadsheet sent by a whistleblower who called themselves the Insider. I opened the file and gasped. It was a complete breakdown of every mismanaged scholarship and every fake fee charge from the last 5 years. The spreadsheet showed exactly how the money was moved and, most importantly, who had authorized each transaction. My heart pounded as I saw the names of the university elite, including President Sterling and the financial director, Director Thorne. They weren't just aware of the fraud. They were the ones who had designed the entire system. Seeing their names in black and white made the situation feel incredibly real and dangerous. I wasn't just fighting a billing office anymore. I was taking on the most powerful people on campus. I realized that the Insider must be someone very close to the top who was sick of the corruption. This spreadsheet was the final piece of evidence I needed to prove that the fraud was a top-down operation. The university's response to my investigation was swift and brutal. The next day, I was called into a formal meeting with the university's legal team. They didn't even mention the fees. Instead, they accused me of unauthorized access to sensitive data and data theft. They claimed that the evidence I had collected was stolen and that I would face criminal charges if I didn't hand over my laptop and all my files immediately. A lawyer in a sharp suit told me that my academic career was over and that I should just walk away while I still had my freedom. I felt a wave of terror, but I remembered the spreadsheet and the recordings of Mr. Vance. I looked the lawyer in the eye and refused to hand over anything. I told him that I knew exactly what was in those files and that I wasn't going to let them bully me into silence. I walked out of the room with my head held high, even though my legs felt like jelly. I knew that I had officially crossed the point of no return. I decided right then and there that I was going to go public, no matter what it cost me. I spent the next 48 hours locked in my room, planning my strategy. I knew I couldn't just tell my story. I had to show the evidence in a way that couldn't be ignored. I started drafting a long, detailed blog post that explained everything: the withheld degree, the forged signatures, and the hidden accounts. I included screenshots of the memos and the spreadsheet from the whistleblower. I also reached out to a local investigative journalist named Clara, who had a reputation for taking on corrupt institutions. I prepared a physical folder of all my documentation to hand over to her as a backup. As I worked, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was still there, but it was being pushed aside by a fierce determination to get justice for myself and the other students. Just as I was about to hit the save button on my draft, my internet connection suddenly cut out. I tried to log back in, but my university ID had been completely deactivated. The university IT department had flagged my activity as suspicious and was trying to cut me off from the world. They were trying to silence me digitally, but they were too late. I didn't let the IT lockout stop me. I went to a local public library and used one of their computers to finish my post and send everything to Clara. By that afternoon, the story was live. I shared the link on every social media platform I could find, using hashtags that I knew other students were following. To my surprise, the story exploded almost instantly. Within hours, hundreds of students were sharing my post and adding their own stories of weird fees and missing aid. Local news stations started calling my phone, asking for interviews. For the first time, the university was on the defensive. The administration tried to stay quiet at first, but as the public pressure mounted, they were forced to respond. They sent a formal cease and desist letter to my apartment, claiming that my post was full of malicious defamation and demanding that I take it down immediately. They even threatened to sue me for millions of dollars in damages. But the public wasn't buying it. The evidence I had shared was too clear, and the students were starting to rally behind me in a way I had never imagined. With the story now in the public eye, Clara and Mr. Holloway helped me dig even deeper. We started following the trail of the money from the hidden accounts I had discovered. Using the whistleblower spreadsheet, we were able to trace several large transfers of funds directly into personal bank accounts owned by President Sterling and Director Thorne. It wasn't just a slush fund for the school. They were literally pocketing millions of dollars of student aid money to fund their own luxury lifestyles. We found records of expensive vacations and private club memberships that were paid for using administrative fee revenue. The depth of the corruption was even worse than I had feared. As we prepared this new evidence for a follow-up story, the threats against me became even more personal. I started receiving anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, with a distorted voice telling me to drop the case or suffer the consequences. Someone even slashed the tires on my car. It was terrifying, but it only proved that we were getting close to the truth that they were desperate to hide. The university administration was in a full-blown panic. I learned from another contact that President Sterling had called a secret emergency board meeting to strategize on how to discredit me and stop the investigation. They were planning to release a statement claiming that I was a troubled student with a history of academic dishonesty. But what they didn't know was that some of the office staff were now on my side. One of the secretaries had secretly recorded a part of that board meeting and sent it to me. In the recording, you could hear Director Thorne clearly discussing how they had hidden hundreds of student complaints over the years to keep the fraud secret. Hearing their cold, calculating voices made my blood boil. They didn't care about the students at all. We were just numbers on a spreadsheet that they could manipulate for profit. I handed the recording over to Clara, knowing it would be the final blow to their credibility. The university was trying to bury me, but they were only digging their own grave deeper with every secret meeting they held. In a desperate move to calm the public, the university suddenly announced that they had discovered a small accounting error and that they had corrected the fees for me and a few other students. My online balance suddenly showed zero, and I received an email saying my degree was ready for pickup. For a moment, I felt a wave of relief. I thought I had won. I went to the office and finally held that piece of paper in my hands. But as I walked across campus, I realized that something was still wrong. Mr. Holloway called me and pointed out that the university's correction only covered a fraction of the students we had identified. The deeper records he was looking at showed that the fraud was still continuing in other departments, even bigger than we had first imagined. They were trying to give me a false victory to make me stop, while they continued to steal from thousands of other unsuspecting students. I looked at my diploma and realized it didn't mean anything if I left everyone else behind. The fight wasn't over until the whole system was fixed. I decided to double down. I posted a video online where I showed my corrected bill and then explained why it wasn't enough. I showed the new evidence we had found about the millions of dollars being funneled into personal accounts. I asked every student who had ever been charged a weird fee to join me in a class action effort. The response was like a tidal wave. Social media amplified the story even further, and a hashtag university fraud began to trend nationwide. Thousands of students from other universities even started checking their own records, realizing they might be victims too. The university's PR department tried to spin the story, calling my video a misunderstanding of complex finance, but the public backlash was growing too fast for them to control. People were calling for a full state audit of the university's books. I saw the fear in the administrators' eyes as they walked to their cars, surrounded by reporters. They had tried to buy me off with a piece of paper, but they had underestimated my commitment to the truth. The story was now much bigger than just my degree. As the public pressure reached a breaking point, a group of prominent civil rights lawyers stepped in. They offered to represent me and the other students for free, and they filed a massive formal complaint against the university in state court. This legal intervention was a huge turning point. The university could no longer hide behind privacy laws to keep their records secret. However, the administrators didn't go down without one last vicious fight. They launched a smear campaign against me, leaking my private student records to the media and trying to make me look like I was just seeking fame. They even hired a private investigator to follow me and try to find any dirt on my past. I saw my face on the news with headlines questioning my motives. It was a difficult time, and I felt my confidence start to waver. But then I received a call from a student I had never met. She told me that because of my story, she had discovered she was being overcharged $3,000 and was finally able to pay for her textbooks. Her voice reminded me why I was doing this. The real investigative breakthrough happened when the court-ordered audit began. Federal investigators were able to gain access to the university's internal servers, and they found a hidden folder titled Project Growth. Inside were documents that revealed the full, horrifying scale of the misappropriated funds. It wasn't just a few fees. They had created entire fake aid programs that existed only on paper to draw down millions of dollars in federal grant money. The documents showed that this money was then split among the top-level administrators. There were even spreadsheets showing how they had targeted students they thought were the least likely to complain. The evidence linked President Sterling and Director Thorne directly to the fraud in their own handwriting. When the news of Project Growth broke, the campus went into a state of shock. The people who were supposed to be our mentors and leaders were revealed to be nothing more than common thieves. The evidence was now so overwhelming that there was no way for them to deny it anymore. They were trapped by their own greed and their own digital trail. The climax of the entire battle was a public university board meeting that was broadcast live to the entire state. I was invited to speak, and as I walked into the room, I saw President Sterling and Director Thorne sitting at the long mahogany table. They looked pale and exhausted, their expensive suits looking out of place in a room full of angry students and parents. When it was my turn, I didn't read from a script. I stood up and looked them both in the eye, holding up the proof of their forged signatures and the Project Growth documents. I confronted them with the stories of the students whose lives they had nearly ruined for the sake of a few more dollars in their bank accounts. The tension in the room was so thick you could feel it. The executives tried to deny any wrongdoing one last time, claiming these were just procedural errors and that they had done nothing illegal. But as they spoke, the audience started to hiss and boo. They were no longer the ones in control. The truth was out, and their arrogant excuses were falling on deaf ears. The aftermath of that meeting was explosive. National media coverage revealed that the administrators had pocketed over $15 million over the last decade. They showed how the school had withheld thousands of degrees and manipulated financial aid to maximize their personal profit. The university tried one last desperate PR campaign, hiring a high-priced firm to try and change the narrative by talking about the school's long history of excellence. But it was too late. The public had seen the records and heard the recordings. The community was united in its demand for justice. I saw protesters outside the administration building every day, carrying signs with my name on them. The university's reputation was in ruins, and the board members were starting to turn on each other to save themselves. It was a chaotic and intense time, but I felt a deep sense of pride. We had taken the most powerful institution in the city and forced it to face the light of day. The wall of silence that had protected them for years was finally completely gone. Justice finally arrived with a series of major announcements. Under the weight of the investigation, the entire board of directors was forced to resign, and President Sterling and Director Thorne were officially placed under investigation by state and federal authorities. The university was ordered to immediately release the degrees of every student who had been affected by the fraudulent fees. Not only that, but the court ordered a full restitution program where the university had to pay back every single dollar they had stolen, plus interest. I stood on a campus green and watched as hundreds of my classmates finally received their diplomas in a special ceremony. There were tears of joy and relief everywhere. The university attempted a few minor cover-ups during the transition, but with the new oversight committee in place, they couldn't get away with anything. My persistence had not only saved my own future, but it had also changed the lives of thousands of other people. I had proven that even the most powerful institution could be held accountable if someone was brave enough to keep digging. As I sat on the grass on graduation day, watching the sun set over the campus, I looked at my diploma one last time. It felt much heavier and more meaningful than it would have a year ago. I thought about that first day in the registrar's office and whispered to myself, if only I hadn't trusted them blindly, I would have never found the strength to fight. My journey had been long and painful, but it had taught me a lesson I would carry for the rest of my life. Students were now empowered. The entire financial aid system was being reformed across the state, and my story was spreading as a warning to other corrupt administrators everywhere. The closing moral of my story is clear. Always question authority, trust your instincts when something feels wrong, and never stop fighting for what you've earned, even when everyone else doubts you. I realized that the university didn't give me my education. I earned it through my studies and my fight for justice. I walked away from the campus for the last time, not as a victim of the system, but as the one who had finally fixed it.